more reserved response from leading Western nations. Now, the two countries have been working together in numerous areas as they felt the need for each other to act as a counterbalance to the U.S. and President Trump. And before we sit down with an expert to talk more about the rise of one-man rule in China and Russia, let's first go over to Devin Whiting at the News Center for the latest headlines at this hour. Devin.
Good afternoon, Jiun. We've got less than a week left until what's considered the deadline for either President Moon Jae-in and his administration or Parliament to submit a bill to revise South Korea's constitution. Reporters were briefed this morning by three Blue House officials, including the senior presidential secretary for civil affairs, on the preamble for the constitution as well as popular sovereignty. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
First and foremost, I make it clear that the people should be the center of the constitutional revision. The Republic of Korea that the people desire is a country that guarantees the people's freedom, safety, and the minimum quality of life as a human being.
Over the course of the next 2 days, the Blue House will reveal more of the proposal. On Wednesday, it'll be decentralization and the rights and privileges of constitutional institutions, including the form of government, on Thursday. President Moon Jae-in ordered the Blue House to prepare the government bill for submission by March 26th. That's the absolute latest. A bill for the amendment can be proposed so that a referendum on it can be held at the same time as the local elections in mid-June. South and North Korea have wrapped up talks this afternoon, arranging the details of a concert in the North by a group of South Korean performers. The two sides are said to have agreed on the date and format of the show, which will be announced later today. Kwon Jang-ho reports.
It's rare for a non-government official to lead inter-Korean talks, but renowned singer and composer Yoon Sang headed the delegation on Tuesday after being chosen by Seoul as arts director for the performance that's set to take place in Pyongyang.
I will do my best to put on a good concert and listen closely to what they have to say. And then I will let you know after I return.
He met with the North Korean delegation at the border village of Panmunjom. They were led by Hyun Sung-won, the director of the North Korean arts troupe that performed in South Korea during the Winter Olympics in March. Much had to be discussed, including the time and location of the performance, the number of performers, and what music would be played. The Unification Ministry had revealed previously that Pyongyang had approved of a modern pop performance, which is why Yoon Sang, whose pop music career spans almost 30 years, was chosen as the art director. Legendary South Korean artists such as Jo Young-pil and Lee Sunny have already been tapped to perform, and K-pop idol groups are also expected to join them. The two Koreas are also expected to approve Yoon and a small team to make a preliminary visit to Pyongyang to inspect the venues for the performance, similar to the trip made by Hyun before her arts troupe came south. The concert is set to take place in early April, a few weeks before the landmark summit between President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in late April. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's top security advisor, who returned today from meetings in the U.S., says Seoul and Washington have agreed to work together closely to ensure the success of their respective summits with North Korea. The head of the National Security Office, Chung Yi-yong, said the back-to-back summits must succeed, not only for the peace and stability of the region, but also for that of the entire world. Chung met with his U.S. counterpart, H.R. McMaster, over 2 days this past weekend in San Francisco, meetings in which he said McMaster agreed to continue discussing various ways to realize that goal. The meetings involved their Japanese counterpart as well, who also agreed to work with the allies for the success of the summits. The South Korean military authorities have announced the schedule for the upcoming joint drills with the United States. The annual exercises were going to start in late February and early March, but were postponed until after the Pyeongchang Olympics and Paralympics, which are now over. According to our Oh Jung-hee, this year's drills are expected to be significantly shorter.
South Korean military authorities announced the schedules of the delayed Seoul-Washington joint military drills on Tuesday.
Defense chiefs of South Korea and the U.S. agreed to resume the annual combined exercises, including this year's Key Resolve drill, the schedules of which are delayed considering the Olympic spirit. The exercises will begin on April 1st and be at a similar level to previous years.
The key resolve, a computerized simulation exercise, is to be held for about 2 weeks starting mid-April. But the full Eagle, which involves the deployment of troops and military equipment, will be similar in scale to last year's exercise and will last 4 weeks starting April 1st. Seoul has notified Pyongyang of the drill schedules through its Western military communication line. This year's drills will be shorter than previous years, and it's also highly likely that the drills will be held at a lower intensity. Whether U.S. strategic assets like nuclear power submarines or aircraft carriers participate in the drills generally determines how intense the drills will be. South Korea's defense ministry didn't specify further on that matter, only saying that South Korea and the U.S. are currently discussing the matter. But according to reports, the drills may not involve B-1B bombers or nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Experts are seeing this as a means to minimize North Korea's possible slamming of the drills, especially when the first inter-Korean summit since 2007 is coming up in a month's time, as well as the first summit meeting between North Korea and the U.S. Seoul's defense ministry stressed that the sole purpose of these drills is to safeguard the nation's defense, while the Pentagon also underscored Seoul's stance by saying the combined exercises are defense-oriented as they've been for many decades. There is a possibility that both drills could overlap with the inter-Korean summit talks slated for late April, depending on the actual date of the talks. 오정희, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
As expected, Vladimir Putin won another term in office as Russian president with a landslide election victory. With him leading Moscow for another 6 years, it seems unlikely that we'll be seeing drastic shifts in policies on North Korea. Our Park Hee-jun has more.
Vladimir Putin has unsurprisingly been re-elected by a landslide to a fourth term as president. With a whopping 76% of the votes, he'll be in power of the largest country in the world, at least until 2024.
Thank you very much for your support. Success waits us. It is very important to stay unified, my dear people. It is very important to win over even those who might have voted for different candidates.
But how does his re-election affect South Korea, and specifically the nuclear crisis on the peninsula? Much depends on Putin himself, but it's believed that Russia will remain faithful to the task of persuading North Korea to denuclearize.
Russia's official stance is that it agrees with pressuring the North to give up its nuclear capabilities, and since it's cooperating with the UN Security Council resolutions, it'll be difficult for Russia to change its stance. But if it doesn't take action, for instance, if it does not deport North Korean workers from Russia, this would not be helpful.
Plus, with the upcoming summits related to North Korea, Russia, together with China, is expected to act assertively for its own interests. Russia wants to keep the U.S. from expanding its influence on the Korean peninsula, so it's likely that Putin will strongly suggest that the nuclear issue be solved through multi-party talks. But to keep Russia from breaking away from international efforts to denuclearize the North, South Korea needs to concentrate its diplomatic efforts on keeping Russia on side. In that respect, experts say it's vital for South Korea to maintain close relations with the U.S. because it's America that has the most influence on Russia diplomatically. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
And to tell us more about the recent rise of strongmen leaders in China and Russia and their impact on the two Koreas as well as the U.S., Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy joins us in the studio today. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, so two strongman leaders, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping, have perhaps opened the door to perhaps a new one-man rule. Now, where do we really see these two countries going from here on out?
In case of Vladimir Putin, the domestic approval rate is very high. I mean, people of Russia really like him. The people of Russia is very much reminiscent of what has been the Russia before, the former Soviet Union, the colder period, the former Soviet Union, the states, the bipolar system, very strong hegemon at the time. So the Russian people like Putin because he is the symbol of strong Russia, strong man, strong Russian ethnic people. So I think Russia domestically would be fine. But the problem, I think, would be on Russia, on China. You know, a lot of scholars and experts meet now. They are reluctantly, expressing some, agonies and their feelings of disappointments about what's going on in China. There are some, hearsays in China that, hey, what would be really the difference between North Korea and China?
Right.
I mean, what China was really proud of itself was that the political system, economic system, different economic system was going forward, a capitalistic, and even political system based upon communism, but still within the Communist Party, things were going okay. They had a very solid systems. Only two-term presidency was allowed. But this time, Xi Jinping's, constitutional revision, kind of removing that two-term constraint of presidency was a shock to the people and experts in China.
And he can almost rule indefinitely now with that clause.
Sure.
Yeah.
Some of my friends in China said that because Xi Jinping was removing most of his political opponents in the name of anti-corruption policies, there are so many political enemies around him, kind of thinking, okay, you step out of presidency, you are dead. I mean, namely dead. I mean, there are a lot of people already thinking and planning assassinating Xi Jinping if he steps out of presidency. So I think it's his destiny to be there, stay there, unless he will be in a chaotic situations. But the system itself and the political system of China itself, I think, is stalemated now.
Now, what's interesting, though, is that the two leaders were quick to congratulate each other while hearing the news of them becoming the leaders for the next, I don't know how many years for Putin for the next 6 years, and for Xi almost indefinitely. Now, the two sides, China and Russia, have been in kind of a honeymoon period, I guess, since 2012, as they cooperated in numerous areas, including trade, communication, science, technology. So tell us more about their relationship up until now.
I think two countries began to cooperate each other ever since the President Obama's Asia pivot policy. But a more critical juncture that made two countries to cooperate each other was, Western countries' economic sanctions in China after its coalitions of Ukraine. There were a lot of economic sanctions, and also because of Trump coming in and Trump being harsh on China, and even though there was some Russian scandal and were some expectations that Russia and the Trump government would go along okay, but because of U.S. tough policy on China and some ongoing sanctions, economic sanctions on Russia, I think that have been a momentum for two countries to cooperate each other. So more specifically, I think there was some import of Russian missile defense system and other weapon systems into China, and also supplies of Russia into China, some natural gases and Siberia. Also, some China money was induced into Russia, which was very helpful in overcoming some economic situations after the Western economic sanctions on Russia after the Ukraine situations. So I think those two countries' cooperation will continue as far as Trump's harsh hardline policy towards China is there.
Right, but I mean, they couldn't agree on everything, though, because Moscow's response to China's One Belt, One Road initiative wasn't so positive. So first, tell us what this new Silk Road narrative is and why Russia wasn't so happy about it.
The One Belt, One Road is a very important initiative for China to become a global leader. I mean, it wanted to become a global leader and wanted to expand into the east, into the Pacific Ocean area. But because of the U.S. constraining China from the Pacific Ocean, it turned to the west and trying to expand into the west. So I think this is a move of China to expand and become a global leader, which I think is a trouble to Russia. Unless there was some common enemy, which is the States, I don't think Russia and China would cooperate that much. But as you mentioned, there exists some ongoing conflicts between two countries, One Belt, One Road, penetrating through through Asia to China to Eastern European countries. I think this is right in front of right next to the Russian content, which is it might help boosting up the Russian economy, but still at the same time, this would have some negative impact on the industrial basis of Russia, for example, financial sectors and energy sectors. So I think there are some minor adjustments going on, but the adjustment on the One Belt, One Road between Russia and China is not going very well.
All right. Well, considering that South Korea is neighbors with these countries, China and Russia, how have they affected South Korea's diplomacy, security, and also economy?
As far as the Korean Peninsula is concerned, the Chinese influence was very huge historically. But recently, because of Trump government's sanctions on China, focusing on the role of China in dealing with North Korea, China has been pretty much shrinking its role in the Korean Peninsula. It needs to think about then focus on the U.S.-China relations rather than focusing on the North Korea issues and Korean Peninsula issues. But now the Trump government's policy has changed. It is now dividing policy toward China and North Korea, regardless of the role of China on North Korea issues. I think a trade war began. I mean, the Trump government is now, making some details about the, some intellectual property issues and other issues, and also how to impose some economic punishments on China based upon the Super 301 article. So I think now China is kind of worrying about its relationship with the United States. But recently, the dialogue phase began in the Korean Peninsula. But at the same time, China is beginning to worry about its shrinking influence in the Korean Peninsula. So I think that's why there are some moves inside China to approach North Korea, beginning to recover its relationship with North Korea.
So what's concerning, though, is that we're seeing this rise in strongmen leadership, like in the U.S. with Trump and President Xi Jinping in China, and also Russian President Vladimir Putin. And there are concerns that such individual leaders might pursue their narrow interests without regards to global peace and security.
Yes, I think we already witnessed the case of THAAD deployment in South Korea. After the U.S. and South Korean governments decided about the THAAD deployment in the territory of South Korea, there was a very immense amount of economic sanctions by China on the South Korean firms and businesses.
Although they didn't say it was official sanctions, right? Yes.
So I think these kind of things would continue in the future. Russia, I'm not sure if Russia is really much interested in the Korean Peninsula. He recently began its policy, East Look policies, which he would focus and emphasize the importance of eastern part of Russia. But I'm not sure if he's that much interested in the Korean Peninsula, because he might try to obtain some economic gains from the Korean Peninsula throughout the trilateral cooperation, South Korea, North Korea, Russia. But unless he is really much engaged in the Korean Peninsula, I don't think Russia would have much to lose from losing influence on the Korean Peninsula. But Chinese case is different. I mean, because the Korean Peninsula for Xi Jinping is a very important buffer state vis-a-vis the United States. So I don't think he would be willing to give up the Korean Peninsula to the side of the United States.
So let's dig further into China's interests. I mean, what's its stance when it comes to denuclearizing North Korea?
I think China is, firmly on the stance of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. Its stance has been twofold. Whenever China is looking at North Korea, it focused on denuclearization and also stability of the Korean Peninsula. But all these policies are related to the United States. When U.S. was jumping into Asia and China and bashing China hard, it always focused on the stability of North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. So whenever North Korea did something, some provocative behaviors or nuclear tests, China always said, okay, more important thing is stability, and didn't really do much to, halt that kind of, provocations of North Korea. But when the U.S. was away from the Asian continent, China focused on denuclearization.
Okay.
So, for example, in 2013, when there was third nuclear test of North Korea, that time was Obama period. Economically, U.S. was very bad, have no leeway to be jumping into Asia and China. So China was very hardline. Xi Jinping, after third nuclear test, was very much harsh on North Korea. So Chinese policy on the Korean Peninsula and North Korea always changes based upon by the fact of U.S. engagement in Asia.
So now, much attention is on the upcoming Inter-Korea Summit in April, as well as the potential meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So we're wondering at this point, how are China and Russia responding to this whole situation unfolding?
The Trump government is, I think, maintaining its hardline policy on Russia and China. In order to block that, hardline policies, I think Russia and China would try to expand these kinds of mechanisms into multilateral mechanisms. Now, the forum and arena to deal with North Korean nuclear issue is South Korea and North Korea and the United States. Trilateral forum. The three countries are main forums to deal with it. But I think China and Russia would try to make it into a six-party process in which they can have more influence on the Korean Peninsula. And the multilateral security arrangement can block the U.S. engagement in Asia, U.S. sanctions or U.S. pressure on China. So I think these kinds of policies they will try in the future. South Korea welcomes this because we cannot ignore the roles of these countries to deal with the Korean Peninsula's, peace regime and denuclearization issues. But I'm not sure what would be the Trump government's intent. I mean, Trump would not like a multilateral forum. He always want to have a direct talk with North Korea, want to, solve these nuclear issues by direct negotiation with Kim Jong-un.
Now, let's talk about Japan. I mean, Japan has been worrying much about the so-called Japan passing, along with China, and has been kind of actively involving itself when it comes to matters dealing with North Korea, and especially amid, over in Japan, Abe's cabinet approval ratings have been plunging recently. So with that in mind, I mean, Japan has actually called for a possible summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So where do we see this going?
Yes, you're right. The Prime Minister Abe's policy towards North Korea was very hardline. Using North Korea threat as an important tool to make his, push for a, constitutional revision. But now things are changing. The Korean Peninsula is moving forward, and now dialogue and summit meetings are waiting for us. So I think Japan is, Prime Minister Abe is very much disappointed. He insisted a very hardline sanction-based policy towards North Korea, but I think he's changing his stance a little bit. Now there were meetings in San Francisco, the Yachi and Jang Eun and the McMaster 3 national security advisors were meeting in San Francisco. I think one of the purposes of the meetings was the U.S. was kind of giving Japan more chances to step into the current mood and of a dialogue. And so I think, Prime Minister Abe would try to use these kind of dialogue, kind of changing its stance, trying to move for a summit meeting with Kim Jong-un and Abe, trying to solve the issues, Japanese abductees to North Korea. But I'm not sure this would make him recover his approval rate. I mean...
Right, that's a separate story, I believe. All right. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Okay, thank you.
And that does it for me, but we'll be back here tomorrow at the same time for more news updates, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.